My name is Ramon Jackson. I'm the curator of African American History and Culture here at the South Carolina State Museum. And recently we acquired this 1815 Bible that belonged to South Carolina abolitionist by the name of William Turpin. After doing some digging, I realized that there was only one scholar who had really written anything substantive about him in the past few decades. And so figured out he went to grad school with me. So this is Dr. David Dangerfield. And so I figured bringing you in made a lot of sense, David, because you're just about the only scholar that's written about him, right?
I think so, at least who's still alive. Turpin was originally from Rhode Island.
Okay.
And he had a business partnership with a man named Thomas Wadsworth in Charleston, and they also operated their merchant business in the upstate. And what makes Turpin and Wadsworth really unique in South Carolina history is they were white men who were fairly committed to abolitionism. Wadsworth died in 1799, and when he died, his will laid out emancipation for almost 24 enslaved people, but also provided them with acreage, farm tools, and some livestock to get started with their freedom in the upstate, in Abbeville, Laurens, and Newberry districts. William Turpin passed away in 1835, and some 36 years later, still set out a significant amount of money, $8,000, to be divided up among those families that Wadsworth had set free so many years before. And Turpin, as we see in the pages of this Bible, also freed other people beyond those in 1799. So just really remarkable and unique story.
Huh. Now, most folks who are watching this might think this is just a Bible, right? And why would we bring this in? Well, one of the reasons that we did is because of what's on the first page. So I'm gonna pop this up here, try and be as careful as I can. But inside is an insert, a series of pages that list names of individuals that William Turpin freed between 1807 and 1826. Had you seen this before? What did you think when you first saw images of this list, and how does it compare to some of what you've seen in the past as part of your scholarship?
Well, first of all, when you called me, I got cold chills, and I was really, really excited about this. I didn't know about the Bible. I study free people of color, so African Americans or non-whites who were free during the slave regime, before the Civil War. And I've written a little bit about the people set free by Wadsworth and Turpin because I encountered them really when I was starting my dissertation, but I'd never seen anything like this. This is really remarkable.
What stands out to you about it?
First of all, the number of people that they set free. It wasn't unheard of for an enslaver to free or emancipate an individual enslaved person, or maybe even an enslaved family. But I really have never, other than Wadsworth and Turpin, I've never seen so many people set free, emancipated by an individual or a partnership.
Now, would Turpin have been alone in this type of work? Give me a sense of how extensive that process would have been to free one's enslaved property.
That's an interesting question. So if we go back to Wadsworth's will, Turpin's business partner in 1799, and this Bible lists those people as well, because Turpin is who effected those emancipations. The will is 1799. In 1800, the South Carolina legislature made it harder for an enslaver to free an enslaved person. This is in reaction partly to the Haitian Revolution and fears about what free African Americans would mean in a slave society. There was fear that they would maybe inspire other enslaved people to want freedom. So that's going on. And the other thing that's happening around 1800 is the cotton gin is really taken off. Mm-hmm. So enslaved people are much more valuable to enslavers in South Carolina and really across the South at this point, because the cotton gin opens up a lot more arable farmland for upland cotton, right, to be profitable. So in 1800, the legislature ruled that you had to have a jury of 5 freeholders, a local jury of 5 freeholders, um, allow an emancipation. They had to sign off on it if you wanted to free an enslaved person. This gets even harder as the years progress, as we march toward the Civil War, or as they march toward the Civil War, it gets harder.
What kind of influenced Turpin to shift on this question of slavery and freedom? Like, what is he experiencing in the early 19th century that perhaps nudged him in this direction or drove him there forthrightly?
We don't have a good handle on precisely what pushed him over the edge. We know that when Turpin and Wadsworth freed people, they put them under the care of the Bush River Quaker community outside of Newberry, and the Quakers had a committee of 5 members who would serve as guardians to oversee them, not just overseeing their spiritual needs per se, but also overseeing their legal needs. So there's some indication that because the Quakers were committed to abolition, that influenced Wadsworth and Turpin, and indeed Turpin's obituary that you found indicates that he was at least affiliated with the Society of Friends. I think that was part of it.
Yeah, I think one of the inserts, one of the next pages lists several members of the Bush River Quakers. I believe it's this one here, and kind of references those who are kind of in charge or guardians of those who are emancipated. Based on your research, did all of the individuals remain free? Because there is kind of potential for being returned to slavery in various ways. So can you give me a sense of what happened to some of the folks that were emancipated based on what you know?
Based on what we can tell from the records, they all remained free with one possible exception. But that freedom was marked by limitations, right? At the same time that the state of South Carolina was making it more difficult to free enslaved people, they were also making the lives of those who were already freed much more difficult. This is one of the reasons why they had to have guardians, or were supposed to have guardians. The slave regime, or the state government at that time, felt like free people of color needed white oversight, right? Because they're still committed to this idea that slavery was the best thing for people of color. And they wanted free people of color to have guardians to make sure that they were behaving in a way that didn't challenge slavery, would be the best way to put it. Sometimes guardians abuse that role. We have evidence of that. I don't really have a feeling that the Bush River Quakers abused that role, but that was a reality. They also weren't allowed to vote. They weren't allowed to carry firearms. There were all sorts of legal restrictions. They couldn't testify against whites in court, for example. And then in the case of Boston, we see evidence in 1829 that one of the men Turpin freed outside of Charleston, he lists him here as number 17, 30 years old when he was freed, died in 1833, set free 12th of May, 1820. In 1829, Boston was under the care of a white guardian, and this white guardian, John Glenn, reported that Boston had been kidnapped by who he presumed to be slave traders with the intention of selling this free person into enslavement.
What do we know about what happened to Boston? Have we been able to find any kind of postscript to that story? Because I saw the article as well, and Glenn was distraught. I mean, when you read this newspaper article, you can clearly get a sense of how outraged he was by this crime, and then also, the attitudes of other Charlestonians about kind of what happened. So can you give me a sense of what happened to Boston?
We don't know exactly what happened to him, other than Turpin knew that he died in 1833, which would seem to indicate that he at least was able to get home and get back his freedom, but we don't see a postscript as to exactly how that may have happened. And it is possible that he died in slavery, and Turpin knew that, but I have my doubts. I think he must have gotten his freedom back.
Now, some of these folks end up taking Turpin's last name. Is that possibly in recognition of his role in manumitting him, or is there some other reason for why some of these individuals that are listed in his 1835 will actually had his last name?
They probably took his last name in recognition that he'd emancipated them. We also see that some of the people in Newberry and Lawrence counties took the name Wadsworth as well. That was probably honoring those emancipations, but it was not unheard of for free people of color to carry the names of their white ancestors, white forebears, who freed them, and they took the family name. That was not unheard of. We don't have an indication that that happened in this case, at least not yet, but it did happen.
So we noticed that there were some other inserts here. There's a list of birth dates that seem to be well beyond Turpin's passing. And then there's this kind of drawing of a pair. Can you give us a sense of what you think of some of these other inserts? There's also a lock of hair inside here as well. So give me a sense of how often you think Turpin might have used this Bible. I mean, the pages seem to be in great condition. So what do you think he may have used this Bible for? Was it more ceremonial, or was it to actually practice the faith?
I think it's important that he recorded the names of these people in his Bible. And you asked earlier about what his motivations may have been. I think that whether he was actually a practicing Quaker or not, I think religion was clearly a part of his motivation, because he recorded them in the pages of his Bible. And in some of his writings, we have a few manuscripts that he left behind. He wrote letters to Thomas Jefferson. He wrote letters to James Madison, expressing his desire that more people would dedicate themselves to abolition. And the language he uses in those letters to the former presidents speaks of what God was doing for the cause of abolition. So I think he very clearly saw this through the lens of Christianity.
Wow. So I guess the last question that I have is, have you been able to track down any descendants of some of the folks who are listed in the 35 will that you might have looked at earlier, or that are listed here? What do we know about what became of the folks who were manumitted beyond Boston?
So the census records from the 1850s and 1860s show us that there were still families living in Newberry, Lawrence County, Abbeville County. They were known as districts back then, but still living in those neighborhoods, carrying the names Wadsworth and carrying the names Turpin. So we're pretty certain, I'm pretty certain, that these are the descendants of the people set free by Wadsworth and by Turpin. But we have to keep working, teasing out details from the records to make the connections between the people listed here in Turpin's Bible and his will and Wadsworth's will with the folks that we have living in those counties in the 1850s and 1860s. One of the things that makes that difficult is the earlier census records, when we would trace those families, they don't, Lawrence County, for example, they don't list the last names for free people of color, right? They're still listed by their first name and first name only, which gives you a further indication of, even though they were free, their legal statuses in those communities was shaky, was not absolute.
Okay. So, just thinking about what's possible, where do you see research using this Bible headed? Like, what do you think are some of the possibilities for an object like this here at the museum?
This tells a story, an important story about free people of color, their hardships, what they went through to become free and to live out that freedom. And I don't want to say enjoy it, because that freedom was not absolute. Their citizenship was not a full citizenship. But this Bible tells their story, begins to tell their story. And it has renewed my interest in trying to trace their lives from that moment of freedom to their descendants today, to try to find some of those people and reunite them with this part of the story.
Yeah, I think that's a mission we share too. So, hey, thank you for spending some time with us and telling us a little bit about Reverend Turpin and his work here.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, brother.
Yeah.
All right.